Last but not least, Montrose Waite, the man who couldn't wait.
Yeah.
So I like his hat there, by the way.
Yeah, hat is dope.
See, I got an entry here for him. This is a pretty cool book. Profiles of African-American missionaries. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to read some of it. And then Pastor Isaiah, just feel free to interject commentary anytime you'd like to kind of give some context as you would like. This looks like a lot to read. Well,
admittedly, I'm not as familiar with Waite as I am with some of the others.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me read a little bit about him. Montrose Waite received the call to be missionary at age 17 in Jamaica, where he was born. A missionary from Jamaica had gone to England to be trained for missionary work in Africa. While home on furlough, he said to me by the Holy Spirit, so this is Montrose Waite recounting this, that I would be a bearer of the gospel to some place where there was a need, end quote. Montrose grew up in a Christian, poor family with 11 children. And I know we got a Canadian Jamaican in the house, D. New. So this is your patron saint right now, D. New. Just kidding. Life was not easy. His 5 older brothers went abroad, and he stayed to care for the younger ones and to help his aging parents. When the war in Europe broke out in 1914, his father thought he should enlist in a volunteer company organized in Jamaica. His father was an evangelist, and their church was associated with the CNMA, that's Christian Area Missionary Alliance, which had its headquarters in New York. A white American friend of their pastor helped arrange for him to go to America. That American provided $50 needed by each passenger landing in America. And this is Montrose Waite. I made up my mind that I must succeed in the U.S. I had a cabin mate from Jamaica to New York. I told him that my desire was to enter the ministry. He thought I would change my mind after I started making money. In 1916, after arriving in New York City, Montrose Waite made his way to New Haven and stayed with his brother and began working for the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Montrose then had to use his savings for he had an operation, it looks like, and had to work an extra year to replace the funds. A friend came from Billy Sunday's crusade in Boston, having become a Christian there. Let's say, go ahead.
No. You just mentioned the name Billy Sunday, so I kind of,
He's making you laugh already?
Yeah.
Oh, man, where'd my picture of Montrose Waite go? I had to bring my picture back up. Somehow my picture disappeared from Montrose Waite. I'll get it back up here in a second, guys. Montrose, the two took off for Nyack together in 1917. Montrose requested and was allowed to work part-time and was protected from the flu, which killed a number of people that winter. God kept providing funds as needed for food, clothes. Now, look, as we've read all these folks tonight, I hope one thing that you guys get out of this is when you're obedient to God's call in your life, He will provide. Do you see that in the story after story with these folks? And we're just skimming the surface, you know what I mean? We're not going all the way down deep, but there's some amazing faith in these individuals, but God provides every time. Just want to draw that out. Montrose graduated in 1920 when the Marcus Garvey movement had started. The colonial powers, especially Britain and France, were alarmed over this man's program because their African subjects had heard about Garvey and wanted to welcome him to Africa. These colonial powers decided that no black Americans would be permitted to land anywhere in Africa. Montrose had applied to go to Africa and had been accepted. The CNMA was the only white society of the evangelical groups who had decided to use black missionaries. This was chiefly because black churches contributed to their missionary fund. While waiting to hear from the CNMA, Montrose proceeded to apply for his passport. He was still a subject of Great Britain and was therefore entitled to one. The passport came. He took it with him to the annual CNMA convention and showed it to Dr. R.H. Glover, the Foreign Secretary. By the way, reading that little paragraph, I don't know if you guys are catching it, but notice how politics and racism are playing a role in actually, in many cases, stunting missions growth. I don't know if you guys caught the implications there. That's bad news. That's bad news. It's funny because sometimes people are like, they wanted to get these Africans and these black folks Christians at all costs. Not really all so much. Nope. Not really all so much. He took it with him to the annual CNMA convention and showed it to the Foreign Secretary. He took the passport to validate it. Montrose later went to his New York office to find out when he would be going to Africa. There were others waiting to be sent as well. They had a work established in Sierra Leone for 25 years. But the white missionaries on the field did not want black co-workers, even though they were missionaries to black people. They did not want black co-workers as they did missions work in Africa to black people.
Yep.
Explain this to me, everyone. Explain this to me. Reverend Collette approached the CNMA board on his behalf without results, so he offered to help Montrose Waite with a missionary preaching position in the South with a church whose members were illiterate. So he's like in a holding pattern here. Montrose still gladly went, stopping back in Philadelphia for 2 weeks and leaving at night to arrive in the daylight. In North Carolina, there were about 10 people at his first Wednesday night prayer meeting. Montrose was excited and embarked on visiting and preaching across the South and North, where he was invited by pastors and friends. During these travels, he met Ella Hamilton, who had also been called to missions. She decided to go to Nyack for training, and he continued to preach and raise his support. This was 7 years after his call to missions in 1916. His baggage was 2 foot lockers, wooden cases weighing about 80 pounds each, and a canvas bag containing a camp bed on which he slept for several years in the field. At last, after spending 32 days traveling, he landed in Sierra Leone in 1923. The CNM had missionaries in 2 of the tribes, Timni and Karanko. There were at least 11 different dialects in Sierra Leone. Each dialect was essentially a different foreign language. The capital city was Freetown, the city where the British were urged to send those from Canada who had come up from America through the Underground Railroad. After they arrived, the British were urged to send a missionary to them. Missionaries traveled on foot and canoe to the interior tribal people. This is pioneer work, ladies and gentlemen. They found Anglican Bishop Taylor Smith and also English Methodist and United Brethren from America active in Sierra Leone. It was mandatory that each missionary study to get a working knowledge of the tribal language within 1 year. Montrose went with another veteran missionary, Mr. David Rupp, to the Sumbaya tribe. Now, again, being a missionary is hard enough, but imagine encountering all this racism and stuff along the way. But nonetheless, by God's grace, these men did it. The people practiced ancestor worship. These ancestors were called upon to help oppose evil spirits. After a missionary learned the Minke language which they spoke, they preached and taught them. They became their doctor, lawyer, as well as father, who had money to lend and give to those who needed help. They were built a hut by various tribes, so a place to live now. Much of the preparations for their home took place with about 20 men carrying over 40 miles by foot supplies of roofing and pieces of a former missionary home they dismantled. Nearby they obtained mud, sand, stones, and hard wood, and ordered in cement for the floors. Sounds simple, but plastic mud was needed and had to be obtained from anthills which were dug 10 feet deep and 100 feet in circumference at the bottom. This they carried up to the mountain. Before the house was completed, Ella became very ill and had to be carried in a hammock 38 miles to the train by Marcus and by the same 20 men. His evangelistic work was not neglected. He continued Wednesday and Sunday services during its preparation and was able to complete the home one day before the rainy season. And there's more here to read. I don't want to read too much, but I'm kind of giving you, with the last guide that we're doing, kind of some of the nitty-gritty. So I do want to read this last part of this book. He also started a school with 2 leading Muslim men, a leader in their superstition, as well as one of his servant boys. They all became believers. You hear that? One white missionary with only an 8th grade education wanted to curtail this English school because they were taught in English. The missionary told him he didn't think it was wise to educate the African because you couldn't control him after he got an education. As a result, they didn't have the opportunity of reading the Bible. However, Musukaba, who had been the leader of superstition, became a great witness. Now, we just got to stop there. Like, I need some comment. You heard that last part I just read, right? So first of all, Montrose Waite is more educated than his white missionary friend. You see what I'm saying? He is educating the Africans in English. The missionary, who has a lower level of education than Montrose Waite, says, don't educate the Africans because once they have an education, they're harder to control. As if that's the job of a missionary, by the way. But, I mean, do you see? Isaiah, got some commentary on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, this is nothing new. This duplicity and this doublespeak is actually nothing new because, you know, if you go to the Museum of the Bible right now in Washington, D.C., you'll see a document there called the Slave Bible. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a Bible that has I think 50% of the Old Testament missing, and upwards to 70% of the New Testament missing. Essentially, what it does is it omits the liberationist passages that the slaves could potentially see and really wrap their minds around and use for their own liberation and struggle for freedom. So long before Montrose Waite arrived in Liberia for missions, you had double standards and really asinine approaches to Christianizing the slaves. Racism has been prevalent, and it was only heightened as Europe was colonizing Africa. Ultimately, this is a financial transaction, and missionaries are just there to make that go a little bit smoother. And so, it doesn't surprise me, because from the very beginning of sort of European missions to Africa, you've seen this type of irony and essentially hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that gospel work would be impeded by racism in this way. Let me read you the little entry here, so just kind of wrap up him. 1891 to 1978, born in Jamaica, leader in building support in and for the African-American Church for Missions, is educated in Nyack, New York, suffered many setbacks to go to Africa because of bigotry, which we talked about, sailed in 1923 to Sierra Leone, founded the Afro-American Missionary Crusade in 1847. Oh, that date's wrong. I'm sorry. I got to look up the right date. That is not. I think it's might be 1947. That's not the right date. Served with his wife and 7 children in Liberia as field director of the AAMC. Continued as a missionary until 1962. And again, I like his hat.
Yeah, his hat's dope.
Street apologist. Street apologist.